Okay, everyone. This is coaching for Laura, not her real name. Her name starts with L, and she wrote in about being in a new university job and not being able to finish the remaining chunk of her dissertation. Um, and I wanted to look at this request for a couple of reasons. One is this is kind of a there's this big project and I'm almost done and somehow I can't get myself to do the last bit of it is a kind of archetypal internal resistance situation. It's pretty common. But also because Laura's, like what she wrote in on the form about coaching, what she wanted to know from coaching, she explained a lot about what she's been doing. And in her explanation, I saw a lot of the kind of mind habits that smart people get into when we kind of hit the wall of internal resistance and can't quite figure out what's happening. And, y'all are smart with very analytic brains, what I call self-eating brains, which means they really like to chew on everything. But when we bring this tendency to the problem of internal resistance, it tends to take us into kind of a negative direction, or at least a less helpful direction. So I'm going to talk about how we wind up analyzing this situation, and sort of how I see that playing out in what Laura wrote, and then I'll suggest something else, a different framework that we can use that I think is more helpful and will give you more traction. So I'm going to share screen. Here we go. And you all are going to get a taste of my drawing skills, which my university students are very familiar with. So this is a paradigm that I call how bad am I? So it really is one in which we're gathering a lot of data, we're analyzing it, we're sort of sifting through it, but we're doing it from the perspective of the judge. So I live in England. This is the judge here with the wig on. It's also easier to show that it's a judge when you draw the wig, when you can't draw. So when we're in this paradigm, we tend to focus on sort of what the charge is. So Laura was like, I have been dragging my feet for 2 years trying to get this done. Okay, so that's the charge. That's what I've been doing wrong. And then we kind of sift through all of this, like potentially, but maybe not mitigating evidence, like, well, but I'm writing a lot of lectures and I'm in a new job and I don't have that much time and there's a lot of demands on my time. And then we have some idea of like, if we could just do this, we'd be, quote unquote, exonerated. So Laura, in your case, it was, I need to finish this in this amount of time and I'm gonna work 10 to 15 hours a week. And then that will actually decide the question of how bad I am by making me good again. And this approach tends to produce a lot of thought loops and kind of what I call relitigation, because the question, how bad am I? In this case, it sort of boils down to, do I have time for this or not? Do I have brain space for this or not? And you have a bunch of like, well, I get home, I'm really tired, but I could try to work at night, but maybe I can't. And it's like we're looking for some kind of outside assessment of like, how much do we suck by not doing this? Do we have time? And so even, we can talk ourselves down to a point where we're like, yes, I clearly have no time. I'm already working 60 hours a week. And then we find out, well, so-and-so is working 60 hours a week and they wrote 2 chapters of their dissertation in their first job. And then the whole fucking thing starts again. And part of this paradigm too also has to do with punishment. Like we're often trying to think of like how we'll be punished if we don't finish. And we try to use the punishment to like speed us along. So this is the judgment paradigm. It is a kind of self-analysis, self-scrutiny that's focused on judging and assessing how bad we are. Okay, because of stupid Zoom, I have to stop share and restart with a different window. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so this is the other paradigm, which is more what I recommend. And this one is the detective paradigm. So that is supposed to be a magnifying glass where it's like shining onto your own brain. So in this paradigm, we want to ask, what is my brain's objection and why? And actually, Laura, you did do this in one paragraph. You really started to shift into this kind of detective mode, which is another reason I wanted to focus on this request for coaching. So you're like, when I sit down, I wind up doing this. I say I don't have that much time, but I also notice when I do have time, I don't protect it. That is great. That is the kind of analysis we want to bring. And so the main question here is not how bad am I, but what is my brain's objection to doing this and why? right? So it's also analytical. It's also about sifting data. It's also about sort of sorting through, but the goal is not a moral assessment of like whether we suck. It's trying to figure out, it's assuming your brain, your brain has a reason for not wanting to finish the dissertation or not wanting to work on finishing it. And B, it's possible to understand and address that objection. So 3 questions or 3 sort of areas of analysis I recommend. The first one, Laura, you've already done, which is to really analyze what happens when you try. This is really important because sometimes when you look at what you do when you try to do the thing you're resisting, it gives you some information about what your brain thinks is preferable. So if you tend to help people or spend time with your kids or clean the house, then we know that your brain wants to do something that it finds, perhaps morally acceptable, or that you feel more comfortable serving other people than putting your own needs first. Like there are lots of things to dig into there. So that's one question. What happens when I try? The second question is what I call the magic wand question, and it has 2 applications basically. So the first one is, imagine I wave my magic wand and you are suddenly done with the dissertation. Like you find out you've been doing automatic writing all night and you come in one morning and you're like, oh my God, it's fucking finished. How do you feel? And your brain may immediately say, oh, that's great, but stick with it and see if there's anything else there. Is it all delight? Is there any little niggle? Because that question will often surface whatever it is that your brain does not want to have happen, what it's trying to prevent by keeping you from working. The other application is about focusing on the act of doing it. So it may be that it's not the project being finished that your brain is worried about, but what will happen when you work on it. So if I use my magic wand and you were suddenly unable to keep yourself from working on the dissertation 3 hours a day, what does that bring up? Does that seem like great, I wouldn't run away anymore? Or does that feel like, oh my God, no, I'm going to have to face it and I'll have to look at so-and-so's comments and he never liked me and I'll never be able to make it good enough for him, right? That will surface other things. And then the third area is comparison over time. So this is something that, if I was coaching you directly, I would ask you, besides what happens when I try, another kind of contextual question I'd ask is, when else has this happened? And if at all, and what do these situations have in common? Because that usually can tell us a lot. What are the common denominators? So I don't want to let this run too long. I'm already at 12 minutes, but I just want to kind of wrap up by saying, I hope you can see that, in the first paradigm, you're trying to figure out how bad you are. The questions are very moral and they don't really shed any light on the situation. They don't help you understand what's happening. They just help you, but they don't really, because there's no final answer, figure out how bad you're being. And then the other paradigm is about curiosity. It's not about morality. It's about being a detective. It's about pattern recognition. It's about, actually trying to look at the data and say, if there was an answer here, what do I think it would be? And this is something your brain, Laura, the academic, and everybody else on my list, because I know the kind of people you are, your brain is really good at pattern recognition. It's really good at finding cause and effect. It's just that when because internal resistance pushes our buttons around not being good enough and about being lazy or not being disciplined, we shift into that moral paradigm, and that whole analytic part of our brain, which could be so fucking helpful here, just shuts down. Okay, so I'm going to review the 3 questions. The 3 questions are, what happens when I try and what can I learn from that? Magic wand for having it finished or not being able to avoid working on it. And then context, history. When else has this happened? Where else does it happen? Those 3 things will give you so much more information and so much more of a vantage point to start to solve the problem than trying to figure out, am I using my time wisely enough? Or am I really as busy as I think I am? No, throw those questions out, Laura, and the rest of you. Leave the judge behind, pick up your giant, poorly drawn magnifying glass and look at your brain, see what's happening. You got questions, let me know. And if you want to get on the list for coaching, I'll put the link in the description.